Hello everybody to the next video of the series of videos where I lock some terminologies in. In the last one we did matriarchy and patriarchy, and today I would like to work on the words judgment, opinion, rule, and free will. One thing to notice right away is that I've put opinion and rule as two examples of judgments, which is what they are. But we'll get into more details as we go along. For anyone who's seen my previous videos or has seen some of my work will recognize this map. We will find judgment in the 9th emergent level of this map, within the routines, what I call different flows of different conditionings that animals create out of their memory regions, which we all have. So routines are neural cascades or networks that happen within us and other animals. And they can be either non-sociocultural or sociocultural, which means that any given routine can be involved in a cultural system or not. One of the most straightforward and simple routines are the ones of movement, so the act of just moving a hand or walking or running. Resting, that means the act of relaxing the muscles. Protection, which can involve aggression, and much more. Those are defined to be older routines that an animal can perform. Now, out of this larger group, we can create a subgroup of certain routines that are interactive, meaning that they involve another animal. If you go for a walk in the woods by yourself, that's not an interactive learning in this context. Interactive means interactive with other animals, especially as we go towards cultural systems, interactive within one's own tribe or one's own sociocultural group. From this context, we can have interactive learnings, for example, between humans and crows. And then we can have interactive learnings between crows amongst themselves and humans amongst themselves, which render very different results. And then there are social observational learnings, which is sociality, which is part of interactive learnings that create sociality. A human can become a friend with a crow, so that would be an example of sociality. Whereas a random interaction between a human and a crow doesn't have to involve sociality. It could be just a random encounter. But that one would be classified as interactive. So we're closing in on where the cultural systems start to get formed. And from sociality, cultural systems evolve, and sociocultural learnings are the ones that actually get replicated very faithfully. So being social means that two animals are simply being around each other, but not necessarily replicating each other's ways, if you will. Whereas in the cultural system, imitation or replication starts to emerge. And out of these, there are various different subgroups of different kinds of sociocultural learnings, or as I call them, strategies that exist. Notice that routine in itself is the same thing as a strategy, and I've defined this before, whereas the strategy is a type of a routine that is being replicated within a sociocultural system. Okay? Again, that's my own definition. Now, out of these different examples of different sociocultural learnings, we've got regular habituated strategies of societal functionality. And then we have imitation. That's where the process of mean to bit expression exists. And then we step into the world of judgments and operant conditioning. And then another example I gave was regulation and governance. I will be focusing right now specifically on judgments. So what is a judgment? I will be explaining and also reading some excerpts from my writing to define many of these terminologies. In short, a judgment is the act of implementing a memetically coded script of behavior for the societal order of transportation, for example, in this case. So it goes from a meme to a bit usually, meaning you might see someone not put their seatbelt on while knowing and relying on that it ought to be put on. Meaning that you learned this at some point in the past. You had an experience where you witnessed somebody either talk to you about it or do it. And a meme, by definition, carries something that somebody ought to do, something that one should do. And knowing that, the act of judging is the act, the routine or a strategy, a learned strategy of once one sees something that is not allowed, one then judges it through a bid. In this case, as an example, the person would tell somebody, you must wear a seatbelt when you sit into a car seat. Now, that's more in the act of telling a person what to do. It could be don't do that, or I think it's wrong that you're doing that. That would be more of a specific judgment call. This kind of a bit is more how a judgment is expressed in different ways, where it can be embedded within the context, even though the person is just simply telling a person to put a seatbelt on. Basically, judgments are activators and repressors of mimetic expression. You can think of them that way. And I explore judgment as the strategy number 3 in my writing in the book, Forces of Society. So judgment is by definition a stream of conditionings, it's a routine, and it's a strategy. If I see something happening and I scold it, this is by definition an assignment and a strategy. Of course, the judgment itself can be derived from different sources. We can judge with our own opinions, as I'll get into it soon, or with socially established memes. So it can come from within or from without. So judgments in their most general form serve to maintain a societal order and growth of any cultural group. They're neural processes that are in charge of regulating all societal routines, or neural cascades, if you want to use more of a technical term. And they turn them into strategies. In our general lexicon, a judgment means a collection of things. It can mean an ability to make sensible comparative decisions. It can mean an opinion, which is one individual's personal judgment. It can be a court decision, which can be negative or a positive, and which can then further be used as a meme to further shape society, where it could end up becoming an instance of law, which is the strongest form a meme can acquire, or for that matter, an opinion can acquire. And then a judgment can even take a theistic form, where certain judgments are said to be brought to us by higher entities than us, which is technically true, as judgments are constructs of millions of years of ancestral neurobiological development, which is something bigger than any of us and any of our inventions, something that is coded in us in form of personal moralities that we are born with, which have evolved to shape our societal ethics, defined as universal way to exist based on which we inherently get judged. And finally, it also represents the actual act of casting a judgment onto someone or a group, which can come in both a punitive or rewarding form. From this, we can construct a general understanding of a judgment in the context of this book. So from there, we can define a judgment as a socio-cultural routine or a strategy which contains a meme whose reinforcement source can be personal or societal. It has gone through some ethically comparative decision process, and hopefully it was reasonable, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be reasonable. It is in some form announced to a member or members of a group as a standard strategy of societal order. So it needs to become sort of official. Although it doesn't necessarily have to. This is when it starts working itself towards rules. It can come in 2 modes. There can be judgments that allow and judgments that disallow. So when somebody judges, it could be positive or it could be negative. So when someone says, oh, good job, that is judgment, as Marshall Rosenberg would always point out himself. And when you say that's not okay, then you're disallowing. And finally, a judgment gives rise to modes of operant conditioning, which is resulting behavior depending on what kind of judgment gets carried out. And I explore that further in my writing. And the judgment ultimately consists of 2 conditionings. The experience of the meme, so having the corrective thought when I see someone not behaving to a certain standard, and then the behavior a bit, which is the performing corrective behavior when witnessing someone not behaving to standard. Now let's have a look how judgments function within a specific societal system. We can have either an egalitarian dynamic between individuals, or we can have a hierarchical dynamic. Each society, each group will have a dose of both of these. Of course, strictly when it comes to being super organized, a hierarchy kicks in, whereas egalitarians are more in the friendship zones. But by and large, they both exist and can express in any form or in any way. From here, every person carries a judgment within themselves. And when these judgments are expressed in an egalitarian system, the way a specific rule is drawn out of people's individual opinions will be by negotiating directly, which means this would technically be a democratic situation, because if a majority expresses a dislike towards something, then that meme will survive. Whereas in hierarchical systems, the memes are passed on from the individual or smaller group in charge. So the judgment calls and the opinions of the ones in charge will be passed on down and carried out without much negotiation onto the other members of the group. So the way this would work is that you would have a judgment to start with as an opinion. And then that opinion, if it becomes more prevalent, will go into a rule of thumb, which is something that's not written anywhere, nobody really knows, but kind of generally everybody does. And from there on, it can move into an actual rule. So, for example, when you go into somebody's home, they can have their own rules. And even without them setting the rules, there's usually rules of thumb of how to behave that are not really in the law books. But they're all enforced as a result of different opinions of the individuals around. Furthermore, rules then go into laws. And laws are irrefutable. They're basically judgment calls that are opinions that have been upgraded to the highest form, if you will, in terms of how they are applied onto society and how the individuals within the society are compelled to abide by the laws, whereas people are not compelled to abide by opinions necessarily. An opinion is one individual's personal judgment on a matter. Wandering knowledges are ideas that are outside of rules and laws of any given society. An idea doesn't necessarily have to belong to a specific system of cultural values or norms. For example, a person might come up with a novel idea and never tell anyone. These are essentially one's opinions or opinions of a group of two or more. Opinions are usually heavily influenced by one's emotional states in regards to a subject. They can involve strict rational scrutiny, or they don't have to necessarily. And the decision of subscribing to a specific opinion is ultimately decided and conformed by one's emotional state. And the emotion you can describe in the rational context from going from doesn't make sense, oh, it makes sense. There's a relief there. There is a sense of judgment in one's own, as in fairness, that something was done properly, so the person can finally relax. So the acts of judgment and opinion, and of course from there, as we climb into rules and laws, they gain stronger and stronger emotional weight, or emotional force from that matter, that is actually spread onto more and more people as well. And we are all packages of genetic expression. These expressions of life are literal life forces. They're our needs. And from that angle, they also form what we would think of our own individual opinions and our personal morality. This is the bubble of personal existence of every individual. Even the opinion itself, as it climbs towards the worlds of rules, can take many forms. You have personal opinion, but then you also got public opinion. You have second opinion. You have layman's opinion. You have grandma's opinion, you have expert opinion, you can have well-established researcher's opinion, you can just have an accepted opinion. So a rule can just be an opinion that was accepted through any reason whatsoever. Many of one's personal memes in form of one's own opinions, stories, and behaviors have and continue to exist completely outside of the societal systems and in one's own private world. At the same time, a large portion of culturally imposed memes and bits that accompany them saturate our brains from societal influence all the time. Rules and laws, all which are also memes, are generally and predominantly thought of as carriers of code of conduct. Rules and laws, which are all memes, and by the way, I should say, a judgment is an expressed meme. And rules and laws right here, all which are memes at their core, are generally and predominantly thought of as carriers of codes of conduct of the society that they serve. And that's why they can differ in different societies, because there's different roads to different rules and different laws. So opinions are unofficial judgments. Opinions are society's immature judgments, if you will, if you think in the context of adopting judgments into the societal ethical package, into societal book of ethics. So opinions are one's own personal memes. Opinion is one or a number of individuals stand on a certain matter that is not legislated for and that is not officially part of their society's rules and laws. A person can have a very good opinion. It could even be a just opinion. And it might just not be in agreement with the rules and laws, because the rules and laws might or might not be just as well. So just because something is a rule or law doesn't necessarily make the opinion on the other side right or wrong. They can be either on the other side. So a fact may be included in someone's opinion about a subject, which would take it in the direction of making it a scientific opinion. But nevertheless, it would still be individual and personal to that one individual. As a result, opinions usually don't have societal influence. Rules and laws do. If an opinion ever became a societal meme, then it would be called a rule or a law. From there, opinions are outside of rules and laws, really, by definition. Someone can, of course, implement their own opinions in their lives as their personal rules and laws, regardless of whether they collide with their society's rules, laws, or not. Basically, opinion becomes a cultural value or a norm when or once a society starts following it as a rule or as a law. This is another image that I've shown a few times, and it's the different levels of societal mimetic system. I am growing an interest in exploring the fact that we're at the level of being able to do global governance, and how does that affect the other rules and laws and people at the very, very bottom of it. And notice that the very first level, which is the level of the very individuals, is where the forces of opinion exist. So this is the only level where we will see opinions. As soon as we start going into, city and municipal and province, state and federal mimetic levels, opinions don't exist there, because things are based on rules and laws in those areas, and everything else is opinions that exist within those systems directly out of the individuals, who will negotiate and balance their opinions against the rules and orders of society. And sometimes rules become laws. Opinions, on the other hand, run amok in societies. You can think of them as all the other viruses and bacteria that exist on a living tree, some existing co-symbiotically, some not. One common word that I've heard thrown around in recent years is grifting, because a grifter is a person who's not attached to mainstream or generally accepted consensus. And of course it's not until somebody's forced to have to do something in a specific situation when the difference between an opinion and a rule is very obviously seen. So if somebody just expresses their opinion, there wouldn't be a sense that they're wanting to apply that meme onto everybody and ask them to have to behave that way. Whereas if it was a rule, then people have to take their shoes off when they come in somewhere, even though they might not do that at home. So the rules of another person's place, whether one takes their shoes off in certain situations, can be either guided by their own opinions and the places where they are, where those opinions apply, or they will be affected by the rules and the laws of other places in society that they visit. Now, one seemingly random strategy of societal system is gossip, because gossip is the glue that fills the gaps in the framework of society, is the facultative or luxury meme expression in cultural tissues. Gossip deals with any behavior or thought that are not necessarily regulated through official rules and laws, but still have agency within a societal group. All this happens through the gossiping process, where personal opinions play the governing role. So opinions from here seep into the general public despite the other rules and laws, because gossip functions in between it all. In contrast, a governmental office in a society passes bills that represents laws making judgments. Without the bill, a judgment generally remains on the level of opinion. So that legislative bill allows or even makes a meme express itself in wider society. And note here how a piece of legislation can be used by an individual to have their rights and use the law to protect themselves, but it can equally be used to impose their rights and impose the law onto people who may not agree with them. For example, one can have the right to use the society's healthcare system, but the society can equally decide to make you have to use aspects of the healthcare system in order to remain in the society. And then you'll have the difference between peer pressures and the rules of law, meaning a peer pressure is essentially a public opinion. If one is not allowed to legally be against public opinion, but a public opinion happens to influence laws, then a society would have a problem with any lobbying group that influences the public opinion through paid media. So rule of law is the official word for operant conditioning, where societal behaviors get shaped. Governments can even drive public opinion besides laws, which is what rules ultimately are. So congruently pushing for, what our opinions would be and what the rules that we succumb to would be. And how much can we trust to be all in our favor too, which is a separate question. Even Sagan compelled us to ask ourselves how confident we are that the power to drive and determine public opinion would always reside in responsible hands. And from there, you have memes that survive and memes that don't survive. All our thoughts that don't get included into some larger cultural sphere will remain as our opinions and perish with us, ultimately. Now, rules and laws are not about one person. They're an emergent phenomenon of social cultural groups. People can have and follow their own rules and laws in their everyday personal life, but those are their personal opinions, considering that they're not part of the collective societal meme sphere. And we do this all the time. Like when we go into a room, are we reading the room and interacting with people based on how they are, or are we following certain rules and just acting according to a specific scripted way, let's say? Or do you cross the road because there are no cars or because there's some signage? Both having been in a legal context. There's always a mix between somebody gauging their own personal situation and what they should in the moment be compelled to do based on circumstances. So basically, to conclude, judgments can either be one's own opinions, or they can gradually build into more and more established rules within many individuals in a society. So it's almost like the spreading of the judgment across a society and making it into a rule of a law that everybody agrees with is how a judgment proliferates itself from an opinion into a world of rules and laws. And within here, there is the concept of free will that I would like to really quickly touch upon. I hope Dr. Robert Sapolsky doesn't mind me defining free will through the context of this framework rather than the way he's been exploring and many others have been exploring in terms of determinism and non-determinism. My definition is that the free will world actually exists within the context of one's own personal opinion and one's own biology, one's own needs. Free will, of course, everything's influenced by everything, and there's forces coming from all sides. The force of the free will is directly related to having one's own opinion on how to do something and be free to exert it without the influence of external forces in this case. That's how I define it. So rules, laws, and even coordinated gossip, I guess, to some degree, because it's an emergent field, actually work against free will of an individual who has the capacity to want to go for a run, want to explore an unmet need, or whatever it may be. The act of wanting and pursuing to get one's own need met is the act of exercising free will. Them controlling it through emotional regulation and through either self-inflicted rules and regulations or society-inflicted ones are outside of the domain of free will. And then finally, I want to make a quick comment about the isomorphism of many of these systems. Routines in the way how they build culture are very isomorphic to the way molecular networks over here build living systems. What would be gene to protein expression is isomorphic to what would be a meme to bit expression in the world of cultural routines. This entire process can analogously be thought of as a genetic expression process within an organism, starting with proteins called transcription factors, which are found inactive in the cell's cytoplasm, right? And then when they get activated by certain hormones, then they change their conformation and go on their way to activate or enhance relevant genes, which, if not blocked through their epigenetic methylation or some other similar process, will start their expression of the necessary proteins through transcription and translation. Now, similarly, judgments themselves exist inactive in a society's social environment. It's just in the back of our minds at all times. And once they are activated by various social dynamics and cues, that invokes their moral responsibility and commitment. It'll call for their enhancement and activation of relevant memes that we would have remembered, which, unless repressed due to some governing regulation, will replicate and express desired behaviors through observation and repetition, because humans naturally repeat and follow and have that built into them. This is how operant conditioning increases cultural mimetic expression. Some word for thought. In conclusion, to lock in finally these terminologies, I've defined a judgment that expresses itself as an opinion or as a rule, and is also in the domain of one's own free will. I will continue exploring some new terminologies and making sure I lock all of them in, and then the conversation about cultural systems and everything around us becomes very, very crisp, clear, and interesting to explore. Thank you again, and looking forward to the next one.